listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, June 17th, 2022. And let me tell you, Andrew, before we get into what we want to talk about, let's just go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room in terms of nerdy and geeky stuff. Ms. Marvel, as of this recording, has 2 episodes out. I've only seen one of them. I think you've seen both.
Yes.
But it's kind of like it's
fun.
It's people. It's grabbing onto culture in a very positive and celebrated way, despite being review bombed by assholes on the internet.
Sure.
But that's just to be expected for
Welcome to the future.
That's expected from every DC and Marvel property that's released at this point.
I mean, anything with brown people or women, right?
Or mildly non-comics accurate costumes. Let's be real. But it's nerds are stupid. Not anybody listening to this podcast, by the way. But there's assholes everywhere, and luckily it seems like they're being ignored. I feel like when we heard about review bombs early on, like I think maybe let's just say the Solo movie and then Captain Marvel, of course. And by Solo movie, I meant the movie about Han Solo. I felt like there was more discussion like, well, is this movie actually bad? People are kind of like, oh yeah, no, people are just being jerks.
Right.
and our people are coming to the show for its own merits. And as they should, man. I am, of the two of us, sort of the well-known Marvel skeptic. That first episode had so much creativity, so much earnest, just excitement and verve. Like it was like it's probably the most refreshing MCU thing I've seen in a very long time.
Well, and she is like the actor they have. She's great. Like,
well, not for nothing. Like, I think they do a really good job of. They did a really good job of casting, and it seems like they actually hired kids, and they actually got kids that could act believably, right?
Yes.
Like, and so, which also speaks to how well it's written. And actually, not to go to something we talked about recently. I wonder, and this is going to sound really weird, I really wonder if the creators of the show were in part inspired by the British show Sex Education, co-starring Ncuti Gatwa, who is going to be the new Doctor Who. But the one thing I love about that show is that there's a lot of cinematic qualities that I'm seeing in terms of how, like, especially the school scenes are filmed. But in terms of just natural acting, the characters come across as very believable as teenagers, and I'm really seeing that here as well. But that's just me drawing conclusions where there are none, which is another word for an English major. But what I'm trying to say is that I was just flabbergasted by that first episode, and not to mention all the clever use of animation and stuff like that, like which reminds me of things like the recent animated film Mitchells versus Machines. They do clever stuff with that. I am so psyched for this show. I
mean, the way they turn things, like to have stuff that is normally like implied or like here it's animated, right? Like here's graphics of actually in the second episode there's a scene where Kamala sees the boy that she's like into, and he's surrounded by like little like 100% and little hearts and stuff, and it is this very kid thing.
Yeah,
but
it's great.
Like it's the way they do it in the show is really great. So I think they've got that down, right? Like they found a way to not just make us tell a story, but do like have things in a way that is interesting and compelling, and
builds character. Like it really,
yeah.
It's not just a superhero show; it's a show about a teenager, right? And it's fabulous. I don't have the article in front of me. I'll try to find it. And if I can't, I'm sorry, dear listeners. But I did read an article where they said it was an interview with the creators of the show, and they're like, "We really hope we get some cosplay of in the first episode when Kamala's dad dresses up as the Hulk."
Oh.
It's like, we want to see that shit at conventions.
Well, what was so I had a friend, actually I would say friend of the show, Alex, who made a joke about, was it Choti Hulk? Mm-hmm. Like, right, that's the whole thing where, because again, in that scene in the show where it's her, Kamala's father dresses up as the Hulk.
Right.
It's like, oh, you could be the little Hulk, right? Yeah. But like, there's I will not pretend to understand the language, but they make I believe it's the term Choti Hulk, which I don't know what it means, but it's clearly a thing. Pakistani or Indian dress, but as Hulk.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, it's pretty great.
No, super exciting.
Super duper exciting.
I mean, I loved it. Like right now, I'm super it's fun.
Yeah.
I can't imagine someone watching this show and being like, ooh, I hate it. Right. So.
Yeah, it has a lot, and it's really picking up, like I said earlier, it's picking up on the vibes of works that I'm seeing made by younger creators. Again, the Mitchells versus the Machines, the animated series, the animated movie that came out last year, it has that sort of manic energy. Turning Red by Disney, was that a Pixar joint too as well? A lot of the same kind of like just rapid fire, just kind of quirky. Yeah. It feels like it's a part of a bigger movement as well, and not just this thing that's confined to the MCU, which connects by the virtue of being kind of connected to this larger kind of almost artistic kind of style. One could negatively make it, age faster, but two, feels like, oh, it's part of something that can push the medium forward. And it's really exciting, absolutely really exciting. And like I said, probably the most exciting thing I've seen come out of Marvel Studios. I don't want to pick a tent pole, but
well, you also haven't watched all their stuff,
right, but
Grandpa.
It's great. It's great.
It's fun.
So we wanted to get the good news out of the way, because today's episode it's about news, but not a news cruise, not a news blast.
A news sad.
It's a news sad horn. Yeah. And it's surprisingly sad times in the world of tabletop role playing. So Andrew, what's going on?
So, in the last week or two, there have been a lot of discussions about two people, relatively important people, or at least notable people in the industry, and how they basically are fucking shitheads.
Wow.
And so the story is about, really, it starts with a Twitter thread by a tattoo artist who said, hey, I worked with these people and they mistreated me. Like they did terrible, like they said awful things to me. They essentially tried to like abuse me, like legally, I guess I don't know what the word, like to try to suggest that like what I was doing was not valid.
Right. Abusing him kind of professionally, honestly. Right. Yeah. And so this person tweeted their experience with like images of texts from these people, and it kind of blew up. And why are we talking about it? Because the two people are Jamison Stone and Satine Phoenix, who are like, I guess in the tabletop role playing game community, sort of like, I don't want to say superstars. They're internet personalities.
And I'd say especially, I think more Satine Phoenix.
How so?
Right. Because she's been in this business for a long time. Like, she's been, doing this since, actually, Google Plus.
Wow. And respect for you calling it by its actual name. That's the first time you've probably done that in, 5 years.
Well,
always calling it Google Positive.
When she got, I think, her start from D&D and Porn Stars with Zach Sabbath, which was a thing from, like I said, 10 years ago, I think.
Oh, what's been her role in, I'll give you some context here. It kind of, and we're not accusing them of anything, but, this is all kind of takes place within the sphere of Wizards of the Coast. Right?
D&D.
D&D, yeah. And she worked for them?
She did. She was their community manager for at least a year, 2018 to 19.
Meaning she's moderating forums and stuff like that? Or
I assume.
Okay.
But I think her big, energy or whatever, what she was doing was, basically a D&D personality, streaming and stuff like that. And honestly, I think more importantly, Jamison Stone is really just, he came from her, right? He's kind of on her coattails.
Right, I think so.
I mean, honestly, like I said, she really got her start from D&D and Porn Stars with, as I said, Zach Sabbath, which basically was a blog or whatever, but it was really, they had a community on Google Plus.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I mentioned Zach Sabbath because he's historically, kind of one of these people that everyone knows, he was a bad guy. And I think when he got exposed as being gross, her response was, "Oh, I didn't know. I thought he was a nice guy. I didn't know he mistreated women. I didn't know he did these things. Oh, sure. He also mistreated me, right?"
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so she established her career as being now a streamer, a performer, and now a developer, someone who runs companies.
Right.
But really the whole thing is that they now are these characters in the D&D sphere, right?
Right.
And they have a company, I think they had, I guess, a company, Apotheosis.
Okay.
And the big thing is that, they had employed people there. They'd been part of other projects. But the important thing is that, guess what?
What?
They're fucking gross people.
Right.
They basically mistreat the contractors and the freelancers that work with them.
Right. It sounds like, because they're kind of in the business of making modules or something like that.
Yes.
That are compatible with D&D, but they are a Patreon supported effort. It sounds like. So they set up a Patreon. For those that don't know, it's kind of like a monthly kind of subscription to a creative person, right? With the promise of hey, we'll give you monthly or weekly content, whatever. It's like an ongoing Kickstarter kind of thing.
But it's also worth pointing out that they do have a company with a Kickstarter.
Right. And they're not mutually exclusive. Whatever it is, Patreon, Kickstarter, they're bringing in freelancers to help them write material, right? And what it seems like, the general behavior that seems to be going on, especially with Satine Phoenix, but I guess more recently with her and Jamison Stone.
And they're married, by the way.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. They seem to be in the business of trying to get out of paying people.
Yes.
As much as possible. It reminds me of, I don't remember his name, but there's an oligarch out of New York who was building big buildings and establishing corporate empires.
Donald Trump.
Oh. Yeah. And what happened to him? I don't know. Oof. But they're pulling from a familiar playbook for people invested in American politics. But the thing is I bring that up not to necessarily bash on a politician, but it's it's a pattern that we've seen before, and the scary thing is that it's a pattern that seems to work. Some people get away with it, that is, and the I'm not invested in the world of tabletop gaming. Somehow, my Twitter feed is, and so over the last weekend and week, I've been seeing a lot of these people that are stepping forward and talking about Satine Phoenix and her immediate sphere of influence. And the interesting thing is that a lot of the people that are speaking up are people that, one, have been quiet about it for a long time because they're really worried about it affecting their ability to participate in tabletop role-playing, communities, interacting with Wizards of the Coast, that kind of stuff, being involved with D&D. But also, the interesting thing is like, it wasn't so much that they were scared. A lot of these people are coming up because they were like, oh, like, this is just how this community works.
Yes.
And that was kind of the disconcerting thing. And like, we're not here to do a deep dive investigation. If you haven't noticed yet, dear listeners, we are not journalists. We are sort of cultural critics. And like, I think the thing that really stood out to me is that this behavior is not necessarily just is not just an isolated incident with these people. It's something that people that are coming out and like, this is something that kind of is. They're saying this is how it works, right? To an extent. And what I mean by that is not being credited on stuff you write, being promised.
Or having people, like, not pay you, or
right.
say they're going to pay you a certain amount and then not actually paying what they said.
Yeah, promising that you'll work on specific aspects on a project, whether it's writing, whether it's performance, and then that just never comes up again. And then there's the kind of the petty backstabbing kind of stuff, the ghosting when you've outlived your usefulness, right? And so that's, I mean, going back to the initial sort of tweet here, it was this tattoo artist that was being really, like, I think more than I've ever seen before. I was really shocked when I came across that original thread, because he was posting screenshots of those conversations. The names and avatars were not edited out at all. I'm like, damn, This guy's here for business. And he was, because it was something that had affected or was affecting his actual business, where he was like flying or at least traveling to different states, negotiating and working on tattoos over multiple sessions, and like doing work before getting any kind of money. Like it was like it was a scary thing, especially as an independent creator on my own. It's like this, you have to, there's only so far you can take good faith. And that's going back to kind of the larger scale here. It seems like a lot of tabletop role playing, and it's especially astonishing to see it with a company as big as, or a franchise as big as D&D, a company as big as Wizards of the Coast, that how much that company, as well as I'm guessing others, operate on this sort of good faith, handshake deals.
And I don't think it's much that like Wizards of the Coast does that,
right?
But that they already have like a very freelancer heavy industry, right?
Yeah,
because like the whole role playing industry is very freelancer heavy, right? There's a lot of people who just like, I'm writing for this, I'm doing this. And that's an industry that is replete with, like, abuse, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think when your whole, like, industry is based on, freelancers, people that'll sign up for practically anything, to get a paycheck, to get their stuff out there, that's a place where abuse happens.
Right, that's what I was thinking. Like, this is an old song in the world of comics, especially because I think the bigger sin for the comics industry, specifically Marvel and DC, is that up until the 80s, they had staff artists, staff writers, as well as editors and advertising and all that stuff. But after the 80s, and from what I understand, it's kind of linked to, what's the word? Residuals.
American labor law.
Well, that and sort of like kind of promising artists on books like points on the success of the book, because that's when the speculative market started really popping, that they just like, oh no, you're freelancers now. But also, that's been a problem. The freelance problem has been a problem since the beginning. The reason why the creators of Superman had to fight real hard to just get a paycheck every month from DC to acknowledge that they created Superman, right? That Jack Kirby didn't get to keep a lot of his art because he was on a work for hire basis, right? And something we're seeing a lot now, like on Twitter in the last week, sort of the same timeline as when all this was happening, we started seeing, I don't remember the inciting tweet, but saying like, I think it was a publisher, an indie publisher, saying something to the effect that you can't have comics without writers. And so artists that get the credit of illustrated by instead of being like co-created by should just shut up and get the paycheck. It's like, no, this is a visual medium, bro. And just kind of getting a lot of feedback in that regard. There's a woeful underappreciation and a sad, and especially in the world of nerdy and geek stuff, what seems like an unpreparedness of how to actually compensate the work of creatives, and that because it's an activity based on inspiration to an extent, based on talent to an extent. It's hard to monetize that. It's hard to quantify that. And so it always seems to kind of come down to either here's the minimal contract we can create for you, or it's like, hey, it's a handshake deal saying, we're friends, right? We'll work it out in the end, right?
And I think we see some of that in this whole situation with Satine Phoenix and Jamison Stone. Some of the threads have a lot of things where it's like, people having screen caps of texts where it's like, hey, this contract, like, this is not what we agreed to. Or in the alternative, like, hey, the contract you agreed to is actually, like, entirely bizarre.
Right.
With the idea, like, oh, you're paid by the word. Oh, but not the word that you submit. The word that we conclude after we've edited.
So,
it's like,
what?
That's not how it works, right? Like, but also, like, it's a tough industry, right? Like, one can imagine lots of people that are super excited to work in role-playing games.
Sure.
And seeing these famous identities, whatever, like stars or Twitter voices, whatever you want to call them.
Right.
And thinking that's, like, you're into the industry. And to sort of discover that, like, oh, these people are the worst.
Yeah. And also, like, should that be how an industry works, right? You should ask yourself, like, makes sense? Right. And inversely, you talk about the contract side of it. There are a lot of people speaking up that were saying stuff like, oh, like, Satine was saying, like, I was her best friend. Right? And like made me feel special, and so, like, yeah, when she asked me, like, you want to, like, just write something up real quick, like, I was doing work for free, but they kept extending it out to weeks, to months, to years even. And then
work for free for a year
because we're friends, we're in this together, right? And all of a sudden, when as soon as someone asks, like, so, like, do I get my, something as simple as, like, do I get my name on this? The doors shut, the friendship ghosts, or they become abusive towards these people.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is bad. And it always, I mean, that's the thing, it always has been bad. And I think,
like, nothing about this is a news story.
No.
Right? It is kind of like, oh, there's someone gross in an industry that involves creatives. Right? Like, we've seen this. But also, it's still gross because it's still happening.
So the question I have, especially for tabletop role-playing, I think to an extent, it's a dead issue for comics because the big two are huge corporate.
That's done fucked.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, one, it's a dying industry. Two, they're big corporations owned by like what Viacom or no Discovery and Disney on the other side. That comics are a loss leader. They don't really care. It's just an IP farm. With tabletop role playing, especially, like it's a smaller field to an extent that makes a lot of money. The questions I have is, why has it happened? Has this gone on? Has this kind of behavior been allowed for so long? And I guess the second question is, not that we have the answers, but what could be done feasibly to fix this? So, like,
I would argue that that what you're seeing is an industry that is just 10, 20 years behind comics, right?
Sure.
Like, what we're seeing is just what comics probably did 10, 20 years ago.
Sure.
I don't actually think it's, like, there's no fix.
No fix?
It's just, like, well, I mean, the fix is, in America, it's just a bigger company absorbs it. And honestly, that's actually, like, really, Wizards of the Coast is now the big company. They're the Disney or the Discovery, I guess.
Right.
And there's no real competitor.
Not even Asmodee?
Well, it's kind of a different... no.
Sure.
But I think that is actually the thing. Like, that the issues that are coming up are things that probably would have, like, felt just as appropriate 20 years ago.
Right.
Like, cheated people out of their money or whatever. Like,
right.
oh, that's comics. Like,
right.
We'd have all laughed at it. And now comics now is all owned by the two big companies.
Right.
And, the role-playing games are just following the same trend.
Right.
Into the big, shitty corporate sphere.
Right. I think, if anything, with comics, the sort of, like, we're friends... or the back, the behind the scenes handshake deals, I think that stuff is dead because it's, owned by...
I mean, or it may still happen on the indie side.
Sure.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But for those
that's
big
all
two,
like,
no.
ha ha ha, you're not like,
right.
That's what you get for being indie. Right.
I think that the interesting thing is, and we've talked about this beforehand, and I guess full disclosure, both Andrew and I know people that work for WotC, and we're not saying that they're part of this at all. But, like, one of the interesting things that we were when we were talking about this beforehand is, like, WotC almost seems to be like a divided company. Like, their like advertising side, their sort of like the more administrative or business side seems to be.
I'll say it. Their marketing house feels like a Fortune 500 company.
Right, like it's very regimented, it's very focused, it's very clear. Probably pretty cut and dry as well. But their creative side is like wild. It's like fucking Mad Max shit out here, right? It's like, why that? How did that happen? That's what I want to know.
I mean, the Wizards of the Coast, like, creative side still feels like this, shitty company where, like, freelancers and you get fired or whatever, except then there's the other side of the house that runs like a big company.
Right.
It's weird. And I think some of that just comes out of the fact that, like, it got bought by Hasbro, right?
Oh, sure. So yeah, we're here to make products, like, and so that part of things is bolstered, while the IP farm side of things is just like, do whatever you want, just make sure we get new stuff. I don't know. Again, we're not speaking for the company. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes.
That's actually, I think, something that's a real recent discovery for it.
Right.
Like the IP farm. Like, oh, let's do IP stuff. Like the fact that Magic the Gathering now has sets that are very IP oriented, right?
Like what?
You have sets. Oh, I'm sorry. Like sets like Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Sets like The Walking Dead.
Okay.
Right. They did a Magic card set for that.
That's interesting. Okay, I hadn't known that. That's pretty wild.
But also like the D&D crossover, right? Like, because they've been really leaning hard into that. So it is like just realizing that like it's all. To me, it feels like D&D and everything else. It's all marketing, right? Like just nothing. It's just a big IP farm.
Indeed.
Is a grump who hates D&D right now. It's like, of course it is, because the game sucks.
Yeah.
Bam!
Right. But I mean, from what I've heard, like Pathfinder isn't immune either. No, yeah, I mean, you're more on the Pathfinder bandwagon than the D&D. But that's the thing. It's like it seems like to an extent there is a baseline that not all, but most successful TTRPG companies seem to be kind of following, and we need to raise that baseline somehow. Mm-hmm. And I think speaking out on Twitter actually, especially for this realm of nerdy and geek stuff, actually has an effect where maybe it wouldn't for comics or movies or something like that, because it's still kind of it's definitely not a small industry, but it's kind of an insulated industry where the fans still have a huge voice, because they keep hiring fans and not paying them. But so I think I'm more optimistic, because I think if enough people speak up on the platforms that these conversations are happening on, then change can actually likely happen. Because it's like you said, like Satine Phoenix kind of came up through the ranks as like an influencer, as like a super fan, and like back into the fire she could be thrown, so,
yeah, I mean it's definitely like that could be,
yeah,
but it's tough, right? Because there's probably other examples of people who were shitty but haven't been addressed,
right? And I should say
actually,
that
arguably,
yeah,
Satine Phoenix is a good example of someone who had not been addressed,
right,
until now, right? The idea that like she's been basically a shitty player in the industry for a decade.
Yeah. But hopefully change can happen, and
I hope
maybe more than a lot of, like I said, more than a lot of other nerdy sort of industries. It seems like change can actually happen here. One of the optimistic things also I've seen on Twitter people that are also big names in the industry that maybe haven't directly had negative experiences with her and her cohort, coming out and saying like, I'm not going to work with her anymore because this is just bad. This is bad. And I believe the victims, for lack of a better word, right? Who is it? Anthony Rapp, I believe, just came out and said like, no, like this is dumb. And I can't remember any other names, but that's okay. I said
that's
one. Good
that's
for me.
One.
I don't know if you would know better than I, if she's directly working with WotC at this point. It doesn't seem like she's just doing her own sort of Patreon thing, Kickstarter thing. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what her future looks like with regard to being involved with major publishers and whether they open those doors for her, But I could also see being like, well, I don't need them. I got my own audience and my own Patreon, and like I'm full indie now. It's like, well, it's because you're full indie because you have to be. Know, we'll see. More on this as it develops, or not if we just stop caring about it. But it's been a weird week in the world of tabletop role-playing game, and I'm glad people are speaking out, and I encourage anybody
I do and that's actually. The one thing I like about this is that when the first person, the tattoo artist, it literally just like started. It's almost like a wildfire, right? Like where he did it, then the next person, then the next, and now it's actually there are people coming out saying like, well, I don't have a real bad story to say, but also here's my negative experience with them,
right. My basic rule for myself that I don't talk about is just be nice.
Right.
It's easier to be nice to people than it is to be mean. Right? And so, like, just be nice. Stop it. Stop being jerks, people. Anyway, it makes me very frustrated.
You say that. Like, that's apparently tough.
Because America.
America.
Anyway, America, the role-playing game. Everybody is just a jerk.
You're all the villain.
We all lose. Here's 100 experience points. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well at our respective handles. On Twitter, you can find Andrew at Profound Dark, tweeting about tabletop role-playing games, among other things. You can find me at dbethel, retweeting other people. You can also find us on Instagram, where you can find old pictures that Andrew has posted at Profound Brick, and you can find me and my work at dbethel Comics.
While you're at our website, forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you can find by clicking on the link in the corner. There you'll find lots of videos, but also our show, which we'll assume you're listening to now. In any case, if you are, like and subscribe.
We use two tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. And they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 attribution license.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to go to the storefront and leaving some sort of review, whether a text review or using the proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. So I'm still excited about Ms. Marvel, and now I'm honestly like when they announced that the Captain Marvel sequel is going to be called The Marvels, I was like, oh, that's a cop out. But now I'm like, yes,
right?
Please.
Like,
so
is she in the movie?
Maybe Shazam will show up, because he was once known as Captain Marvel in the comics.
No,
but
we're done. We're done.
So until you break barriers and bring angry companies together, dear listeners, while still being nice, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplet.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
I'm having real, 80s action movie star problems. And I think a montage is coming up, is what I'm assuming. Oh, I'm tired. Did a lot of furniture moving, if you know what I'm talking about. No, literally, I was moving furniture from one room to another, because...
Still a solid joke, though.
Classic.
Classic.
Where's my notes here?
Notas.
New page. Notas? That's the sound that Sonic makes when he gets some air. Notas?
Notas.
I think the word you're looking for is war criminal.
Well...
Potato.
Did they send me daughters when I asked for sons?
I should say that I'm now recording.
And so am I, and this song's wrecked. How could I expect you to be recording? No, I got nothing.
Nailed it. Fucking, yeah. Nailed it. The themes were strong. Artful is how I describe that.